You never expect a question to end a life. Not when it's asked at the kitchen table. Not when it comes between 2 cups of coffee and the sound of a neighbor mowing their lawn. Not when it's followed by silence and then a smile. But this single question didn't land like most questions. It didn't just hang in the air. It sank into it. And once it was spoken, there was no taking it back. Can we do a DNA test after the baby is born? That was it. Just 10 words. But 10 words can change everything. They'd been married 2 years. Together for 5. By all accounts, they were doing fine. Their friends described them as easygoing. Low drama. Private but affectionate. She worked in healthcare administration, always punctual, rarely absent. He was a warehouse supervisor, quiet, dependable, kept his head down. They weren't flashy. They didn't post much online. They were the kind of couple people forgot to ask about because no one expected them to be in trouble. Until the pregnancy. Until the shift. Until the moments that didn't make sense started to stack up. He noticed first. And first. It wasn't one big thing. It was hundreds of small ones. The way she held her phone just a little tighter when he walked into the room. The way she locked the bathroom door when she never used to. The way she flinched barely when he touched her stomach. And then there were the questions she never asked. She didn't ask about cribs. She didn't ask about names. She didn't ask how he felt. He tried to explain it away. Maybe it was hormones. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she just needed space. But when he placed his hand on her belly and said, "I can't wait to meet him," she just smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a grateful one. Just polite. That night, after she fell asleep, he sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't cry. He didn't talk to anyone. He just stared at the wall. And then he reached for his phone. He searched something that had never crossed his mind before. DNA test after birth, how to ask without causing a fight. He read forums. He read blogs. He read stories of other men who had asked the same thing and regretted it. He scrolled. He scrolled. He stopped. And then, at 2:13 a.m., he typed a note into his phone. Ask her calmly. No accusations, just for peace of mind. He saved it. Locked the screen. Turned off the lamp. And lay down beside her. The next morning he made breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. Just like he always did on Sundays. She was still in bed when he sat down across from her. He waited until her fork hit the plate. Waited until her mouth wasn't full. Waited until she looked him in the eye. Then he said it. Softly. I was thinking, maybe we should do a DNA test after the baby is born. Just to be sure. For both of us. There was a pause. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't throw her plate across the room like he'd imagined. Instead, she smiled. A very slow, very controlled smile. Then she reached across the table and touched his hand. Of course, she said. If that'll make you feel better. She leaned forward, kissed his forehead. And in that moment, he felt relieved. But when he got up to refill his coffee, when he turned his back for just one moment, she picked up her phone. No hesitation. No nerves. Like she'd rehearsed it. She scrolled through her contacts. Paused on one name. One name he'd never heard before. Or maybe had once years ago mentioned in passing. She opened the thread. Typed 5 words. We need to talk. Urgent. She hit send. Put the phone down. On. Folded her napkin. Smiled again. He never saw it. She didn't call her best friend. She didn't call her mother. She didn't even call her sister. She reached out to someone she hadn't spoken to in months. Her ex-boyfriend. The man she thought she'd left behind. The man she told herself she'd gotten over. The man who had been a mistake. Except now he wasn't just a mistake. He was the father. No one knew this part of the story yet. Not the husband. Not the friends. Not the people who would later sit down in police interviews and say, "She always seemed so happy." But what happened in that moment? That one quiet moment after a breakfast conversation. It wasn't just a phone call. It was a decision. One that would stretch across state lines. One that would unearth everything they thought they'd buried. One that would end in blood. She agreed to the test. She smiled when she said it. But her mind was already somewhere else. The walls in their home were the same. The pictures still hung on the wall. The crib was still being delivered next Thursday. But the future he believed in, the family he thought he was building, was already gone. The question had been asked, and from that moment forward, there was no turning back. It was late. A quiet Tuesday night. No arguments, no slamming doors. Just the sound of the shower running and a phone that wouldn't stop vibrating. He hadn't meant to check it. He'd never done it before. Not once. He believed in trust, he'd said so dozens of times, to friends, to himself, to her. But instincts, they don't ask for permission. And that night, as steam filled the bathroom and her laughter echoed faintly through the wall, he reached for the phone sitting face down on the nightstand. It wasn't locked. He would later tell investigators he only meant to look at the name. Just the name. But then he tapped the screen. And what he saw made the world tilt. The conversation wasn't long. It didn't need to be. "I can't do this without you. He's asking too many questions. If he finds out, I'm finished." There were no names in the messages. No dates, no explicit mentions of the baby. But it didn't take much to understand. He knew. And the worst part was, she wasn't panicked. She wasn't worried. She sounded calm, calculated. Like this wasn't new. Like this had been going on far longer than he could ever imagine. He didn't say anything. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even when she kissed him goodbye before leaving for work. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table with the same cold coffee he'd been holding for an hour, watching the screen of his phone like it might give him an answer that didn't feel like betrayal. But it didn't, so he waited. He started watching her, not obsessively. Not with suspicion, more like curiosity. Like a stranger trying to understand someone he thought he knew. He noticed things. How she smiled at her phone more than she smiled at him. How she started sleeping in later, going to bed earlier, spending more time running errands. How she used the word tired like a shield in answer to every question he asked. He brought up baby names one night over dinner. "Do you still like Mason? You used to love that name." She said, "I don't know anymore. I haven't really thought about it." He nodded. Didn't push. Later that week, he suggested a weekend away. Somewhere quiet, somewhere they could reconnect. She looked down at her plate and said, "I don't think I can right now. It's just too much." She didn't say what too much meant. And he didn't ask. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. So he did what people rarely do in stories like this. He didn't explode. He didn't accuse. He prepared. Prepared. Quietly. Deliberately. He looked up paternity laws. Found a clinic. Learned the steps. Wrote down questions on a notepad he kept hidden in his truck. He began documenting things. Receipts, messages, conversations. Not because he was planning to confront her, but because he wanted to be ready when the truth arrived. Then, one night, as they lay side by side, back to back in a bed that used to feel like home, he reached for her hand. And he told her again. "I just want peace of mind," he said. "It's not that I don't trust you, I just want to know, for me, For the baby. For us. She was quiet for a long time. Then she turned over and looked at him. She smiled. She kissed his hand. She said, "Of course, I understand." But her eyes. Every time he looked away, they were somewhere else. A few days later, he noticed something new. Her suitcase was out of the closet. Half-packed. Neatly folded clothes. Travel-sized containers in a clear plastic bag. He asked where she was going. She hesitated. Then she said she wanted to visit her cousin in another state. Just for a few days. Just to clear her head. He asked, "Why now?" She shrugged. Said she needed space. Said she'd feel better after the trip. But he knew. She wasn't coming back. At least not with the truth. That night, while she slept, he went back to the phone. Not hers. His. And he typed a message he'd rewritten a dozen times. "I've decided. I'm doing the test. After delivery. No matter what." He didn't send it to her. He sent it to himself. So that if anything happened, there would be a record. He never told anyone about the message. Never told anyone about the suitcase. Never told anyone he was afraid, but he was. Not of her, of what he was about to find out. The next morning, the suitcase was gone. He found it in the back of her car, under a blanket. Next to it, a burner phone. He didn't open it. He didn't take it. He just stood there, in silence, staring at it. The evidence. The warning. Warning. The answer to a question he hadn't even asked out loud. And that's when he understood. The test was never going to happen, because she was never going to let it. People think betrayal comes with shouting, with fights, with tears. But sometimes it comes dressed as love. In a smile.in, a kiss.in, the soft way someone says, "Of course." He saw it now, clear as day. And what he couldn't have known, what he would never be given the chance to discover, was how far someone would go to keep him from finding the truth. The test wasn't the problem. The result was. Because she already knew the answer. She didn't need paperwork to confirm it. She didn't need a lab technician in a white coat. She knew. And so did the man who'd helped her create the life growing inside her. He wasn't a memory. He wasn't a story she kept to herself. He was present. He was reachable. He was answering her calls. Together they had a plan. Not a perfect one, but a clean one. She'd leave the state. Disappear for a while. Tell her husband she needed time, that the stress was too much, that the pregnancy was taking a toll. She would send him a message. Just one. "I lost the baby." Then she'd go quiet. For a while. For a while. Let the silence do what words couldn't. When she returned, she'd be grief-stricken. Numb. Too broken to talk about it. And too exhausted to explain. And when he reached for the test, she would remind him there was no baby. No test, no questions, no consequences. But the husband, he saw everything. He noticed the change in her mood, the strange calm she carried, the careful packing, the specific items, not a weekend bag, a plan. He noticed the ticket stub, tucked inside her coat pocket, folded, hidden. One way. And then, on a Thursday morning, as she reached for the door, he stood in the hallway and said, "Why are you lying to me?" She froze, hand still on the doorknob, keys in her palm, back turned. And just like that, the exit had closed. She turned around, tried to smile, tried to reach for the script they'd written. "It's nothing," she said. "I just need a break." He didn't respond. He stepped forward, held up the ticket, and looked her in the eye. "You weren't coming back, were you?" She didn't answer. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in him. In her. The plan, the one she'd practiced in her mind a dozen times, was no longer enough. She saw it in his face. In the stillness. In the resolve. He wasn't going to let this go. He was going to take the test. He was going to find out. He was going to learn the truth. And that was something she couldn't afford. That night, after the silence, after the failed departure, after the argument that never quite became one, she made another call. Different tone. Fewer words. She didn't ask for help this time. She gave instructions. The man on the other end didn't argue. He didn't need convincing. He just asked when. They met in the car. Same parking lot where they used to kiss without looking over their shoulders. Now they sat quietly, facing forward. She explained. He listened. Then he said the words she hadn't wanted to say first. "If we're going to do this, it has to look clean." She nodded. Tears welled in her eyes, but none of them fell. Not yet. There were 3 versions of the plan. The first, make it look like a robbery. The second, an accident, fall down the stairs maybe. The third, wait. Wait until he was alone. Wait until she wasn't in the house. Wait until there was no risk of being caught in the same frame. It had to be timed. Timed. Precise. Undeniable in its simplicity. Because the test wasn't just about paternity. It was proof of everything. And once the test was done, there'd be no way to rewrite the story. But time, like truth, was no longer on their side. The husband had started talking. First to his brother. Then to a friend. He told them about the test. About the doubts. About the suitcase. He said something strange was going on. He didn't have proof. But he felt it. Deep in his chest. One of them offered to come over. Stay with him, just in case. He declined. "I've got this. I just need a few more days." But he didn't have a few more days. She came home that night like everything was normal. Kissed him on the cheek. Asked what he wanted for dinner. He watched her. Eyes distant. Heart already halfway out of his chest. They didn't speak much. They went to bed early. And sometime around 2 a.m., while he slept, she sent a message. "It has to be soon. He's getting closer." The reply came 1 minute later. "Tomorrow night. Be ready." She lay back down beside him, curled against him like nothing had changed. He stirred. Barely. She whispered, "I love you." And for the first time in days, he believed her. But what he didn't know, what he would never know, was that it wasn't a confession. It was a goodbye. And the second plan, Lane, had already begun. The child wasn't born yet. But the truth was, it lived between them, unspoken but ever present. In every forced smile. In every text she deleted. In every time she looked away when he mentioned the nursery. A truth with a weight heavier than the child itself. And that truth was scheduled to arrive with the baby, wrapped in hospital bracelets and birth certificates, with doctors' signatures and legal names, with DNA that would say what lips would not. He didn't know how close he was to the answer, to the end, to the moment everything would unravel. But she knew. And so did the other man. The one who didn't belong in the house but did. The one whose name wasn't on the marriage license but should have been on the test. The calls began again. Not like before. They weren't frantic. They weren't afraid. They were quiet, measured, intentional. There wasn't a conversation about what would happen. No plan with steps. No questions like should we? Or what if? Only silence. And silence can be an answer too. It can mean yes. It can mean we're already too far in. It can mean it's the only way left. So when he showed up, the man who wasn't supposed to be there, miles from where his life had moved on, in a city where he had no reason to be, she didn't act surprised. She didn't flinch when he rang the doorbell. She didn't send him away. She didn't ask why. She already knew. And he already knew what had to happen. The husband worked late that night, later than usual. They were setting up the nursery in a few days. He said he wanted to be rested for it. He said he had some calls to finish. He didn't know that 2 blocks away, in a parked car, someone waited with the engine running. It wasn't meant to be messy. It wasn't meant to leave blood on the walls. It wasn't meant to make the news. It was supposed to be the third option. The quiet one. The kind that doesn't raise questions. The kind that leaves no test to process, no aftermath, no evidence. No DNA. She left the door unlocked. That part was easy. He came in quietly. That part was planned. He had gloves. That part was smart. But what they hadn't counted on was the husband still being awake. He was in the living room, sitting on the couch, phone in hand, not working. Not texting. Just staring. Waiting. And when he heard the door open, he didn't stand up. He didn't speak. He just looked toward the hallway and said, "Hey." I knew it. The man hesitated. Only for a second. But it was long enough for doubt. Long enough for the moment to become real. Long enough for the husband to get to his feet. And in that second, everything changed. There was a struggle. Not a long one. A tree. But loud enough. She stayed in the bedroom. Hands over her ears. Tears on her face. But she didn't get up. Not when the lamp fell. Not when the frame shattered. Not even when it went quiet again. When she stepped out, he was gone. The other man, already halfway down the road, already tossing his gloves in a dumpster, already driving away from the house with no headlights. And her husband. He lay still, on the hardwood floor. A silence louder than any argument they'd ever had. She waited an hour before calling. Said she found him like that. Said she didn't know what happened. Said she'd been asleep. And the paramedics. They didn't ask too many questions. It looked like a fall. It looked like an accident. It looked like something that just happened. At first, but the hospital saw bruises that didn't match. The coroner saw fractures that didn't make sense. And the detectives. They saw a story with too many pauses. Too few tears. Too neat a timeline. And one thing missing entirely. A man who shouldn't have been there but was. It didn't go the way they imagined. He fought back. harder than expected, louder than they planned for. There were footsteps, a broken lamp, breathless, frantic motion in the dark, a thud against the floor, a gasp, and then silence. Not the kind they hoped for, not the kind that disappears without questions, but a silence that echoes. A neighbor heard it. Not all of it, just enough. A sound that didn't fit the hour. A thump, then a pause, then nothing. Enough to remember. Enough to tell the police the next morning. It didn't sound like furniture. By daylight, the house was full of people. Uniforms. Notebooks. Polite questions with pointed undertones. And her. She sat on the edge of the couch, wrapped in a blanket she didn't need. Tears in her eyes she couldn't quite summon. She said she found him like that. She said he was fine the night before. She said she didn't know who could do such a thing. But the room didn't believe her. Because the lies. They had fingerprints. Literal ones. On the doorknob. On the doorknob. On the hallway wall. A partial on the base of the broken lamp. The calls. They had records. Timestamps. Deleted threads. Voicemails erased but still recoverable. And her story. It didn't have the muscle memory of truth. It skipped. It stuttered. It contradicted itself. The DNA test, the one that started it all, was never taken. But another test was. One of movement. One of movement. Of motive. Of moments that didn't line up. Why was there a one-way bus ticket in her drawer? Why had she searched for abortion clinics 2 months before the due date? Why was her ex-boyfriend in the same city that night? Why did the door show no sign of forced entry? And why? Why did she delete the message that said, "It has to be soon, he's getting closer"? In the end, it was never just about the baby. It was about something older, darker, less explainable than bloodlines or biology. It was about guilt. It was about shame. It was about someone who built a life on a lie and would rather destroy it than let that lie unravel. She was arrested 3 weeks later. Her ex-boyfriend fled across state lines, but didn't make it far. He was picked up at a rest stop, eating cold fries, waiting for a call that would never come. Neither of them confessed. They didn't need to, because secrets, no matter how carefully kept, leave residue in calls, in timelines, in breath, in silence. The baby was born, health unclaimed, and the test that was never taken, it didn't need to be. Because by then, everyone knew he asked a question, and for that, he was silenced. Forever. Not with rage, not with chaos, but with calculation. Because truth is loud, even when whispered. And for some, it's safer to bury it than to let it be heard. A husband died with doubt in his heart. A child was born with none of the answers. And 2 people, believing they had erased consequence, left a trail no one could ignore. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a crime of prevention, an act of erasure, a murder before the test. This is DNA of Deceit, the murder before the test. Subscribe to hear more true stories where the search for truth cost more than anyone expected. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can ask is the truth.